Kristi Noem stood before the Senate panel confident, polished, and ready to defend the administration's policies, until a single question from Senator Maggie Hassan changed everything. What followed wasn't a minor stumble. It was a moment so alarming it made millions of Americans question whether the people in charge even understood the Constitution they'd sworn to uphold. Within seconds, the illusion of control cracked. Cameras kept rolling, and every word exposed something deeper, something far more dangerous than a simple mistake. When Senator Hassan asked Noem to explain one of the most sacred principles of American liberty, habeas corpus, the silence that followed said more than any prepared talking point ever could. Noem fumbled, then confidently misdefined it as a presidential right to remove people from the country.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Madam Secretary. Secretary Noem, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff recently said that the Trump administration is actively looking at suspending habeas corpus. Last week you were asked about this, and I want to clarify your position because it's obviously really important to get this right. So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President Lincoln used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea. As a senator from the Live Free or Die state, this matters a lot to me and my constituents and to all Americans. So, Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to decide if it should be suspended or not.
It has never
Let
been,
us be clear, though,
it has
that this
never
president,
been done. It has never been done without approval of Congress. Even Abraham Lincoln got retroactive approval from Congress. So I have been asking executive branch nominees a simple question over the past few months. If the president orders them to break the law, I've been asking, will you follow the law or follow the order? I want to ask you a more specific question here. If the president tries to suspend habeas corpus and a federal court reverses the president's order, will you comply with the court order and uphold habeas corpus, or will you follow the president's directive?
we are following all federal court orders and are complying with that, as is the president, and every decision that I make as well.
That is obviously not true for anybody who reads the news. There are federal court orders right now, including returning somebody who was deported mistakenly. But to be clear, this is about a fundamental legal right that ensures that we live in a free society instead of a police state that would have a sham legal system like Russia or North Korea. So I'm glad that you have now committed to following court orders. I'm glad you believe in the basic freedom for Americans if ordered to do so by a court. And again, I want just to make clear that it is critically important that even if the president tries to suspend the right of people to know why they've been detained or imprisoned, if a federal court reverses that order, that you will follow that order. And I hope all members of the administration will, because it's obviously critical that some of the people, for instance, who've been deported by mistake, who didn't get due process, be returned in compliance with court orders. So now, let's move on to another issue. International criminal organizations target Americans with sophisticated cyber crime, including elaborate scams that robbed Americans of billions of dollars, with seniors in the United States losing $5 billion to scammers in 2024 alone. As artificial intelligence improves, so does the ability of criminals to deceive and defraud Americans. With this new technology, criminals can impersonate loved ones, develop advanced malware, or make more convincing phishing messages. How is DHS working to identify trends in illegal activity and ensure that new AI systems have safeguards in place to prevent their use in criminal activity?
Yes, we are working extensively through CISA, but in all of our agencies to make sure that we're going after these criminal, nefarious actors. I would say partnering with private industry is critically important so that we have the insight that we need to really understand the tactics that they use and the advancements in software. The AI ability that they have to adjust and to supersede some of our systems is incredible. And so investing in those systems is important, but also having the knowledge and bringing everybody to the table and breaking down the silos between our agencies and our intelligence agencies is important, so we all have the information that we need to get.
Well, and that gets me to one final point and question here, because Senator Peters began to ask about it. There's been recent reporting that indicates that the Chinese government installed remote access to Chinese-made power inverters in the U.S., raising concerns that the Chinese government could try to disable parts of our power grid. And you made a comment following up on Senator Peters' question about the importance of not only working with private industry on this issue, as you would also want to work on AI, but also on working with state and local governments on cybersecurity. And can you just talk to me a little bit about how DHS is partnering with state and local governments right now on cyber?
Well, that's one of the core critical missions of CISA, is to help those state and local governments harden their systems. We're extremely vulnerable by our weakest link. And so when you have a small state that doesn't have the resources it needs to invest in these security operations, then they're vulnerable to attacks and hacking attempts, and they can access our systems. If they have a contract or a system that interfaces with the federal system, it makes us vulnerable as well. So we are responsible for 10 of the 16 critical infrastructures under the Department of Homeland Security, and making sure that China can't come in and shut down our electrical grid, our water systems, things that people rely on every day for their day-to-day lives is very important. So that's why we need these kind of partnerships, is to make sure that we're secure all the way down to our smallest actor that participates.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate working more with you on that. Thank you.
The air in the room changed. Even seasoned staffers froze. Because what she described wasn't freedom. It was the kind of unchecked authority Americans have fought against for centuries. That's when Hassan interrupted, her tone sharp but calm. "That's incorrect, ma'am." The senator then delivered a short, devastating civics lesson for the world to hear. Habeas corpus is the principle that prevents any government from locking up its citizens without a public reason. Without it, America stops being a democracy and starts looking a lot more like a police state. Hassan's correction cut through the room like a warning flare. This wasn't just about definitions. It was about the understanding, or the erosion, of the very rights that define America. Noem's misstep wasn't harmless confusion. It revealed an administration mindset that saw constitutional boundaries not as limits, but as obstacles. The idea that a president could decide whether citizens have access to due process is exactly what habeas corpus was written to prevent. Hassan knew it, and so did every viewer watching the clip later that night. What she exposed wasn't ignorance. It was normalization. The kind of slow, quiet erosion that starts when people in power stop respecting the words on which this country was built. But Hassan didn't stop there. She pressed deeper, refusing to let the exchange dissolve into vague reassurances. She asked Noem the question that every public servant should be able to answer without hesitation. If the president ordered you to break the law, would you follow the law or the order? Noem's response was wrapped in formality. Talk of procedures, compliance, cooperation, but not clarity. That hesitation mattered, because buried inside that non-answer was the same troubling mindset that has haunted every era when leaders believed their power was above the Constitution. Hassan, refusing to let it slide, asked again, this time sharper, direct, unflinching. If a president tries to suspend habeas corpus and a federal court reverses that order, will you follow the court or the president? The answer should have been one word, yes, but instead came a tangled, hesitant defense that only deepened the concern. Hassan reminded Noem that the government is already ignoring court orders to return people wrongfully deported, to correct mistakes that shattered lives. That's not speculation, it's documented fact. When an administration starts deciding which court orders to obey, it's not enforcing the law, it's redefining it. And that's why this moment mattered so much. Because it wasn't a single gaffe in a hearing. It was a reflection of how fragile freedom becomes when accountability fades. The senator's tone wasn't theatrical, it was urgent. The question wasn't just to Noem, it was to all of us. What happens when leaders no longer see the law as binding? Then came a pivot that revealed something Hassan understood better than most politicians. The fight for democracy doesn't just happen in courtrooms or constitutional debates. It's happening in the digital shadows, too. As she transitioned from habeas corpus to cybercrime and artificial intelligence, the contrast couldn't have been starker. On one hand, a government official struggling to define a centuries-old right. On the other, the rise of 21st-century threats that exploit every weakness in that same government's ability to protect its citizens. Hassan pointed out that scammers had stolen more than $5 billion from American seniors in the past year, using AI tools to impersonate loved ones, clone voices, and trick people into handing over their savings. It was as if she was saying, while some leaders misunderstand the Constitution, others are using algorithms to dismantle trust itself. Noem's response was polished but empty, bureaucratic phrases about breaking down silos and partnering with private industry. The language of someone managing optics, not defending infrastructure. And that's what made the moment even more haunting. Because the same lack of urgency that let her stumble over habeas corpus echoed here too. This time in the face of real, tangible threats. If you can't define liberty, how can you protect it? If you don't grasp the core principles of law, how can you build defenses against digital deception or foreign interference? Hassan's expression during the exchange said everything. The senator wasn't looking for a soundbite. She was trying to measure something far scarier: the competence of the people charged with keeping the nation secure. That's when she raised the final, chilling question. Reports had surfaced that the Chinese government had installed remote access capabilities in Chinese-made power inverters operating across the United States. In simple terms, that meant foreign code inside America's power grid, code that could, in theory, shut down parts of the country with a single command. Hassan wanted to know how DHS planned to stop it. Noem's answer? Another string of vague promises, emphasizing coordination and awareness. For viewers paying attention, it was déjà vu, the same pattern of deflection wrapped in technical language. The same evasion that had defined her earlier answers about constitutional limits. And that's when everything connected. The confusion about habeas corpus, the half-answers about cybercrime, the vague talk about China. It wasn't a series of unrelated moments. It was a portrait of a government that has grown comfortable with not knowing, or worse, pretending to know. A government so busy defending itself that it's forgotten its first responsibility: to understand and uphold the systems that protect the people. When Hassan said that habeas corpus separates free societies from authoritarian ones, she wasn't speaking hypothetically. She was describing the slope we start sliding down when leaders can't explain or won't defend the very laws that keep us free. What makes this exchange between Hassan and Noem so haunting isn't just the embarrassment of a senior official fumbling a constitutional term. It's the realization that confusion at the top can become policy on the ground. When definitions blur, so do rights. When accountability becomes optional, so does justice. And when citizens stop paying attention, history shows exactly what happens next. Hassan's restraint throughout the hearing wasn't politeness, it was precision. She was giving Noem every opportunity to correct herself, to anchor her words in constitutional reality. But as each answer drifted further from clarity, Hassan's message became unmistakable. If you can't articulate freedom, you can't defend it. What's most chilling is how normal moments like this have become. A top official misstates a fundamental right. Social media clips circulate for a day, outrage spikes, and then the next controversy takes over. But the consequences of that normalization are real. Every time these moments fade without accountability, another boundary moves. The extraordinary becomes routine. The unacceptable becomes expected. That's how democratic erosion works. Not in dramatic collapses, but in quiet moments when the people stop demanding competence from those who lead. And yet, Hassan's questioning offered something rare, a reminder that oversight still matters. That democracy only survives when someone in the room is willing to say, "That's incorrect, ma'am." Her calm insistence on clarity wasn't about scoring political points. It was about defending a principle older than the nation itself. Habeas corpus has been suspended only in times of war and never without Congress's approval. Even Lincoln, during the Civil War, sought retroactive consent from lawmakers. The right is that sacred. It exists precisely to stop leaders from deciding, on their own, who deserves liberty and who does not. Noem's answer, confident, wrong, and dangerous, was the perfect example of why that safeguard must never fade into obscurity. As the hearing closed, Hassan thanked Noem for her time. It was a polite formality, but everyone watching understood what had just happened. A United States senator had publicly exposed the fragility of constitutional literacy within the highest levels of government. The clips circulated online within hours, gathering millions of views not because it was sensational, but because it was terrifyingly ordinary. People saw in Noem's words a reflection of something they'd long suspected, that power, when left unexamined, forgets its boundaries. That officials can speak about freedom while misunderstanding its foundation. And that citizens, if they stop paying attention, will wake up one day to find those rights quietly rewritten. In the end, this wasn't a story about political sides. It was a story about civic awareness, about how quickly freedom unravels when complacency replaces comprehension. Hassan's confrontation was more than a moment of political theater. It was a lesson in vigilance. It reminded viewers that democracy doesn't defend itself. It requires people who know the difference between lawful authority and unchecked power, between justice and convenience, between truth and political spin. Because in the end, it's not just what Kristi Noem said that should concern Americans. It's what it revealed, a growing gap between those in power and the principles they're supposed to protect. That gap, left unchallenged, is how every free society begins to lose itself. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, don't let it fade into another forgotten clip. Subscribe, like, and share this video. Because staying informed isn't just awareness, it's protection. The only way to keep democracy alive is to never stop watching.